Suspense.
All right, I think we're almost there. Just wait until the clock turns 12 and then we'll kick into it.
Wonder what the split is between New Zealand and Australia.
All right, it is 12 o'clock. Let's get started. Welcome to Radically's webinar on Beyond Transformation, the missing piece for sustainable change that lasts. I'm Elena, I'm the GM of Radically, and I'm your host today. We have a very interesting panel discussion lined up for you. And so I'm really keen to talk with Elise and Brendan a little bit more about this topic, and I hope you can take something from it as well. But before we kick into it, I just wanted to set the scene a little bit and share some context with you, or actually share a shocking statistic, which is 30% of organizations sustaining change 3 years post-transformation only. So it's not that many. It's really a low percentage. And there's really a pattern that we can see that I wanted to share with you today. I don't know how many of you have seen this curve. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect curve. It actually is not usually speaking about organizational transformation, but it can actually be applied. So the Dunning-Kruger effect suggests that people overestimate their ability and that of the organization to absorb change and to actually sustain change because they are ignorant of unknown unknowns. They don't know what they don't know. And so quite often what we see is that we treat transformation like a project. It is something that we embark on. It has a start, it has an end. And this is really the height of our estimated ability to sustain this change. So transformation complete, project done, right, we can move on. And there's actually a lot of research behind that shows that this is actually the way transformation is looked at today by leaders. However, there's actually this really, really critical phase that comes after the project is complete. And that is when the reality hits and organizations understand that we have a new normal now. We cannot just go back to the way it was before, and we need to sustain it. And so this can really lead to people feeling a little bit lost, the organization maybe not picking up on the new ways of working or the new structures that are put in place. And so it is really important to think about what can be done to smooth out this curve and to actually sustain the change, and more importantly, to protect the investment that organizations have made and the people have made into transformations. The key challenge that we see is that we don't actually see all the work. There's the normal things that are done during a transformation, which is the tangible work. It's looking at org charts, the structures, the processes, systems, and tools, the thing that is visible. But what makes the real difference is a lot of intangible work. Intangible work, such as what is the mindset that needs to change for people, for leadership? What's the behaviors? What's the culture? What's the ownership? Like, how do you really support that change with necessary systems that are not necessarily visible to change? In other words, the enabling intangible work. And so that's what we want to talk about today. Something that I wanted to share with you is Radically's sustained service. So at Radically, we're doing a lot of transformations, and we're seeing this hitting the ground and then sort of slowly moving up quite a lot. And we're really committed to making this a better experience. So we have developed this service, which is a managed service to help organizations in this phase get through this journey much easier and walk alongside them. And we have done that with Origin Zero and Origin, the company that our wonderful first panelist, Elise, is with. We've helped them we've helped Origin Zero, which is a subdivision of Origin Energy, on their transformation journey to accelerate the delivery of their strategy. And then Brendan, who's our second panelist, stayed on to support this transformation in this critical phase of sustaining the change. Now, Elise has been part of Origin Energy for already 12 years, so she knows what she's talking about. And she was really the driving force behind this transformation. So we're really delighted to have her on the panel today. She brings over a decade of experience in various roles, including marketing, communication, and obviously in change leadership. And at the moment, she leads the retail customer experience initiatives as a program manager at Origin Zero. Welcome, Elise. Lovely to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Our second panelist today is Brendan Cameron. Brendan is part of the Radically consulting team. He's a lead consultant for Radically Sustain. Brendan has been with Radically for a really long time already. I think one of the first ones to join, and has seen transformations of small organizations, really large organizations in all sorts of industries and sectors. So he's very well versed in this sort of world. His way is really pragmatic and a tailored approach. So he'll talk a little bit about how he adapts to an organization's needs. And at the moment, he leads our team, our Sustain team, over at a major New Zealand airline. And we're really proud to have him join us on the panel. He has also supported Elise through this journey. Welcome, Brendan.
Thank you.
So let's start. Elise, you go first. Why do many organizations lose momentum after a transformation finishes? And what would you say are critical elements that are often overlooked?
Yeah, I think you've touched on a few of those already in your introduction, Marlene, which was probably a good kind of grounding on that. What we've experienced is that, and I'm sure a lot of people listening will share this also, right? There's a lot of energy that goes into what's the problem and how are we going to solve it and how do we set up the program and who are we going to put on and to work on it, and there's so much to do and we've got these key milestones, and so you can spend a lot of time and energy thinking of it like a project or a short-term program rather than a long-term investment. So I think one of the really important things that you can do to kind of address that is to know that when you embark on a transformation, you have some really clear defined stages. So you will have that initial setup and there'll be a lot of flurry of activity, but actually delivering the benefits comes through setting up a program around how you continue to embed the change over time, how you have really good solid feedback loops so that you're really coaching the behavioral change, you're providing those feedback loops. Yeah, so it's not just one and done, it's every day.
Right, and setting it up and looking ahead already when you start. Yeah, that's really right. Interesting. What would you say, Brendan? What are some of those elements, or what's the reason that?
Yeah, I think there's all this hype, there's all this energy, there's all this excitement around the delivery of the program. And then once it ends, the band gets broken up and people get put into other work. And often there isn't either the capability to continue the work that you've done and the investment you've put in. So I think having a consistent voice or capability that continues to drive the change is pretty critical. I think watching for people's behaviors and making sure that they don't slip back into old habits because things are easier the way we've done them for the last 20 years, right? Will help sustain that change. And being vocal about what you're doing, about what's changing. Are the behaviors changing? Are the mindsets changing? And don't be afraid to use data to show it too. Show that things are changing. And probably the last point is just around, it's going to dip a little as people get used to things, but that's okay as per your curve. It will get better and you'll start to see the benefits of it.
Nice. So that brings it back to what Elise said. Look at it like a journey and plan the journey ahead. Don't lose an owner for the journey and bring transparency so that everyone can come on the journey and come and see that. That is really interesting. That's really interesting. So if we look at a concrete example, sorry, Brendan, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to say that ING Germany has been going through a transformation for something like 17 years. And that sounds horrible on the face of it, but it's because they realize that it needs to continue. And the big bang at the beginning, yes, sure, but it's continuing to, adapt and iterate and kind of review things as they go.
I might add to that, Brendan. I think from our experience at Origin Zero, what really helped us was to establish some systems of work, so some patterns that lived beyond individuals. So they were reliable structures that the teams knew. So things like planning events and retros and ceremonies, are really important tools that provide that framework, provide that scaffolding. So you take it away from a one and done, you make it an ongoing thing, and you take it away from being individuals and you make it as a team effort. And it's something that lives on its own rather than relying on maybe having one voice is great to be the voice of change and the champion of change, but you need to be able to have that widespread across the organization. Yeah,
it needs followers. It doesn't just need a leader. Otherwise, you're dancing by yourself, right? Yeah. And if we look at a sort of a concrete example, Elise, your journey at Origin Zero, what were some of those obstacles that you were facing, trying to once the change was done, trying to sustain it?
Yeah, I mean, we faced lots of challenges, and I'm sure everyone will have similar experiences. A couple that probably come to mind that we really worked on was leadership ownership, how we continued to address sort of siloed teams and competing priorities. So ownership was really important. We needed to engage our senior leadership team. We put together a ways of working champion group, so peer support for each other, that we could share our learnings, provide feedback to each other, and really make sure that it was still top of mind. And like Brendan was saying before, a great tool for us to make sure that we weren't slipping into old habits. So yeah, really kind of getting that leadership mindset was pretty important. I mean, it showed up in lots of different ways, right? So even while we provided coaches for our teams, we had to monitor carefully around how the business leaders were using those coaches and not relying on them entirely to do all of the heavy lifting. We needed to make sure that was shared. One tool that worked quite effectively for that was introducing a maturity scale, which was a great sort of benchmark, and it gave language to everyone, a common language to everyone around what were the kind of behaviours we expected to see as we went on this journey, and that kind of gave clear expectations to everybody around what role they needed to play, how they needed to show up, and also to provide feedback to others if they weren't doing that. So yeah, I think that's kind of, it was a really helpful tool.
Yeah, so interesting. Language, I think that's probably one of the last things that people think about, that this is actually important, developing a new language that everyone can share. And obviously leadership ownership. Too often actually we see that at Radically is this, once this project is done, that it's handed off from leadership to some other place. A change champion group is great, but if they don't have an exec change champion, it loses its momentum. So yeah, very, very interesting. Anything to add from your side, Brendan?
I can't reinforce enough around that leadership behaviors and stuff as well, because this was new to them as well. It's not just new to the teams that are doing the delivery side of things. It's new to leaders. So how do they excuse me, how do they behave? How do they look at the work itself and actually identify where they need to be doing things, and they can delegate work to others? And that's the whole idea of the model we went to, was that, some of that delegation empowerment of the teams to make decisions, as opposed to everything resting on the leaders themselves. But that was new to them. So, changing that behavior was also interesting. Yeah,
I love that. But it takes a lot of courage from leaders to admit that this is new for me as well. And for some, it might not be new, right? They might have been through transformations, but each one is slightly different depending on the context. So Brendan, can you share a real world example where you saw a transformation either get stuck or really falter, and what, from your perspective, made the difference?
Yeah, we had a transformation through a medium-sized business, a few thousand people, and we had an executive team of 11, and we were reporting to the executive team. Now, I don't know about you, but if you get 11 of your family around or 11 of your friends around trying to make a decision, good luck to you, let alone 11 high-powered executives coming to make a decision around, can we hire one FTE? It was difficult. Marlene, you were there with me for some of this, so you remember. And this is through no fault of the executive team. It's just that many people being able to make a decision is really tough, right? So there was lack of consent. There was there was even some perception that there was fiefdom building, people trying to protect their patches and build their patches around resource and budget and that sort of stuff. So what we did to kind of fix that was we requested that we get 1 or 2 execs rather than the 11 to help us with these decisions. And that meant that we could make decisions faster. The 2 execs were kind of in the same wavelength when it came to the things that we were doing. So it was just a lot quicker. And then if there was anything they needed to do, they could always inform the whole exec team, as opposed to going and asking for permission to do things.
Yeah. Anything to add from your perspective, Elise?
Yeah, I think what Brendan was just talking about around giving people the permission to fail was something we had to learn a couple of times over, to be honest. We have a reliance on some strong leadership, a couple of strong personalities, and they usually kind of, it's a normal tendency in a group environment, right? You have some stronger voices and then some quieter ones, and sometimes giving space to fail was really important to get this, the quieter voices to be a bit more active, to come to the party.
Yeah. And I mean, especially in this critical in-between phase, possibly at the start of a transformation, there's more acceptance for failing from the exec, but it actually continues throughout this phase when you adjust to the new normal. So making that a part of learning how we work now, and it being okay, and it being safe.
Yeah, I think what was critical for us was that our executive sponsor demonstrated, reinforced, provided the feedback regularly that it was okay to do so. And kind of, for people who were taking accountability, also gave them the permission to take the foot off the pedal a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So now looking at Radically Sustain slightly, so this is our managed service. Just for those of you who might have joined in a little bit later, we are on a mission. This is a new product of ours to help sustain this, or sustain the change longer. And so key of it is flexibility. How do you flex up and down your resource to actually support this change? So Brendan, speak to me a little bit about how does our offering or external support during this phase adapt to an organization's different maturity levels?
I think that's the key that you've just said there. I think every organization has similar challenges, but the environment, the context is almost always different. So I think we need to understand what it is that you need, and we need to tailor things. We don't do cookie cutter. We have, a wide breadth of experience and stuff to know different organizations. Like it says in my little bio there, we've worked across many domains, many industries, many organizations, small, large, medium. So what's needed for you is specific to you and your problems. So I also think that it depends on what it is that you need in terms of the short term, the midterm, and the long term. Do you want to have a capability, or do you want Radically Sustain to fulfill that need? Do you not have the capability and you need to build that out in your company over the long term? So I think also reviewing, every quarter, where are we at? Have we hit the target that we wanted around capability, or do we not need the capability? And reviewing and making sure we're on the right track and we're getting to where we want to do. So I think, that flexibility is key for us.
Yeah. I can only echo that from seeing what's happening in other organizations. And we've seen that, I think, very strongly in the last year. There has been a trend of building up internal capability to sustain the change, which is great when you can afford it. But it means that you have a large group of people that you need to, I'm going to be honest, need to pay. Cost is a really important factor usually in transformations, and sustaining a really long period of time, and that is not often viable. And so we've seen quite a few of those get made redundant. And so, it's something to choose for organizations, right? To be really critical about, what do I actually need in-house to help me sustain this change? And what is something where I can get external help? And so this flexibility can actually be of real importance.
I was talking to a GM the other day around, you had all this capability and then you made everyone redundant. And he said, well, this wasn't our core capability. Our core capability was X. And that's where we do really, really well. And so we want more of those people to do that. we need the radically sustained people to come in and help us with setting that up. But in 1 year, 1.5 years, whatever it is, we don't think we'll need that capability, and we want to focus on the core capability that we have. So
yeah, very nice. In your experience, Elise, how has this flexibility helped Origin Zero?
It was critical, really. I don't think we would have probably had some of the successes that we did, or achieved some of the change, without having that kind of support. We set it up so that we moved into value streams. So each value stream had their coach. That coach then helped within the individual teams and within that leadership team. So there was always eyes and ears on what was the work that was doing and how are we doing the work, but also then how is that leadership team working as well. It meant that we could also scale up and down, so having a bit of flex. So some value streams weren't always as demanding, or were more mature, probably didn't need as much support, and then we could kind of take some of that capacity and use it into a team who was perhaps a little bit earlier in their journey. So we could we could flex up and down across the teams, rather than having kind of really set resources that had particular remits and had particular KPIs. When we spread it across the whole program, and then we could use the resources where the teams were needed, really helped us to accelerate. So we run an OKR program. Some value streams would have OKRs each quarter and would need extra support, because there was a lot more visibility of that work, and the coaches could really help support driving that as well.
Yeah, nice. We've touched on it a little bit, but one of the critical roles obviously are leaders. And I just wanted to sort of capture it in one question. Elise, what has been the importance of the leadership buy-in in your experience? And the buy-in is one thing, but also have you seen maybe some things that maybe have hindered momentum where you needed to help them adjust?
Yeah, I personally think leadership buy-in is critical. So without leadership buy-in, oftentimes this kind of change looks optional. So the way that your sponsor leads through, gives the direction, really helps to set the tone around this being a journey that everyone is on, and it is, you are committed and you are doing your best to learn and grow and develop. I think where it may have when we didn't have it, what showed up was a lack of commitment. Like, we saw a lot of behaviors going back into old habits, or just being really put on the back burner. It's a real challenge, obviously, right? A lot of the time when you're going through transformation, you're also still maintaining BAU activities, and that often is a real challenge around having those competing priorities. We work with a lot of Australia's commercial and industrial businesses. They can be quite demanding, and obviously they really are our priority. So we need to be able to balance meeting those customer needs with still maintaining some of the change that we were doing. It was a tricky balance to strike. We tended to manage that through our quarterly planning cycle, through re-evaluating our longer term strategy, and making sure that the choices we were making, the activities, and where we were putting our resources and efforts aligned with that strategy. And then we used our, like I spoke about before, our system of work. So our regular planning cycles, our retros, our leadership team meetings, as tools to manage that.
Mm-hmm. You touched on an important point there, and you called it the scaffolding before as well, as like these structures, these planning cycles. And it takes real effort to keep them up and to adapt them. And you need the leadership to be really on board and say, this is the new way of how we're doing things, and really keeping tight to this. And otherwise it fizzles out again. And we've seen that. It's like the retrospectives start disappearing. The planning doesn't get as much attention as it needs. Brendan, you're nodding. Is there anything from your experience that would be useful?
Yeah, it's interesting working with Origin Zero and Elise. And at the beginning, things looked like this, and then by the time we left, things were drastically different. And it was because we kept asking the question, is this valuable? Okay, that part was, but that part wasn't. Okay, well, let's get rid of the piece that wasn't valuable, and let's do more of the stuff that was valuable. So by the time we got to the end, it was so much different. Yeah.
Yeah, we had no fear in saying, okay, this isn't really working.
Yeah.
Okay, let's try something new. One of the other tactics I think we employed quite well was to start to, push the ownership back out, like for certain activities that the program, the transformation program was driving, we started to move those to some of our leaders and invited them for them to iterate and make better and bring their own flavor to it. And so that did help us with more engagement. It also gave us some great new perspectives. We generated a bit of fun. We focused also on how the teams connected, and we brought some personality to things as well.
Nice.
To the leadership question itself, it was interesting. Radically did a bit of soul searching. It must be about 6 months, maybe even 8 months ago now. And we kind of sat down and we looked at all of our engagements, big, small, across all the different industries. And we asked ourselves, which of these engagements were good? Now, good being subjective, obviously, good for us, good for the customer. And we got to the outcomes that we wanted to get to. And we literally drew up a spreadsheet and we did all the numbers. And by far, the number one factor was having executive buy-in. So if we could have the CE, great. But if we could have the group as a whole bought in, hands down, knocks it out of the park every single time. And if I think about that in the context of, excuse me, one of the changes we went through with one of the NZ telcos, and I remember the CE of the time was bought into it. But he wasn't just bought into it. He got his whole team on board. And they were using this story to talk about the transformation. And every single person said the same thing about the story, or something about, I can't remember now, plane taking off and going on a journey and landing. And we're going to, get to a deserted island, something like that. I can't remember. But because every single leader was saying the same thing, everybody was hearing it consistently, everyone bought into it as well. So yeah, having everyone together on that was really, really important.
Yeah. And we go back to the language, and it doesn't just stop with the language. It's also the story that you tell and that you continue to tell. And it will evolve with your transformation as you sustain, or with your change, as you bring this new change into how things are done now around here. I think we've touched on it in a few places, but sort of the internal coaching. And we have actually found that internal coaching often stalls over time. So I'm curious to hear from you, maybe Brendan, start with you first this time. Why does that happen, and how do you think that can be avoided?
I think there's a quote, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I think it's Mike Tyson. And effectively what that's saying is that things change, and if you have a plan that's too rigid and the organization changes and evolves as it goes through the transformation. I mean, the whole reason we go through a transformation is to get better at doing what we do. You have to be able to, and I think Elise has already touched on this earlier, evolve the way that the coaches coach. So as teams mature, as the system of work and these cadences and all these things mature, they won't need to focus on that as much. They need to continually evolve what it is they're coaching, who they're coaching, what parts of the business they're coaching. And again, keep asking themselves, are we delivering value? I find that a lot of the coaches tend to get stuck in this mode of operation that doesn't really, and it's ironic, right? They don't reflect on it themselves and have a look at what is it we're doing? Are we delivering value? And if we're not, what will we do that needs to deliver value? So I think, again, back to what Elise was saying, the coaches themselves need to bake in those reflection points, need to continually adjust, continually look at the business and see where there's areas where they should be helping or working on, even if it's slightly outside their remit. So yeah, I think that constant evolution is a critical part for any coaching team.
Yeah. I think in practice, what happened was we had a lot of hands-on coaching. So a lot of Radically team were really in there facilitating standard ceremonies, really helping drive how we did planning, really helping teach everyone like how to run a good retrospective. Were delivering for us a lot of lunch and learn content to help sort of delve into some concepts outside of in meeting applications. So it was very hands-on at the start, and they were, you know, probably very visible in driving those meetings and those kind of events. But what we were really clear on was that from the get-go that wasn't going to be the model, right? So that was a needs-based thing. We were doing that initially, and it was very clear that over time that they would start to draw back, and then the facilitation of those events was the responsibility of the team. They needed to learn those tools and frameworks and tactics and behaviors, and then they needed to start safely testing them out with some feedback from the coaches. And then we'd sort of just, you know, like we do with children, we give them a bit more freedom, we give them a bit more autonomy. We're still there helicoptering over and keeping an eye on things, but that was a really clear expectation from the start. So that was really important, that it would be quite phased, that the kind of interaction would be intense, and then it would lessen off.
Yeah.
Our one of the clients we're working with at the moment calls it coaching from the front of the room, from the side of the room, from the back of the room, and I really like that that picture, because at the front you're a bit more directive, a bit more command control. As you get toward the back, you're standing back and you're just reviewing and feeding back. So yeah.
And I might add, from other experiences that I've had, the coaching role that you have right after the transformation, right after the transformation, and over time actually changes in the organization. And I do find that many internal practices, especially if they're taking on more junior people to help sort of those coaching moments, actually don't think about that changing role or don't grow into that role, because they're still learning the ropes and they're still doing. And so it is actually really important to understand, okay, at every point in time of this transformation journey, and then the sustaining the change, what do I need and how does this role need to evolve, both in seniority, but also in what they are doing and what they're supporting.
Yeah. I think, like Brendan was saying, that asking the question, are we adding value at each juncture, is really important. And I would say from lived experience too, it's important to, if you are the program leader, to be thinking about, have you got the right match of coach with your team and that leadership team? So we did have a scenario where perhaps personality types, they weren't clashing, but maybe we weren't being able to give the feedback in the way that leader needed to hear it, or they weren't listening. So we needed to switch things up to kind of break that dynamic, to kind of get through what had become a status quo that wasn't really getting us where we wanted to go.
Yeah. Nice. So this was the questions that we had prepared for you based on what we think would be important, but I've seen there's quite a few very interesting questions coming through. So let's move on to putting you guys on the spot and asking some of those questions that our audience are interested in. Got one here that is quite interesting. Look back at real customer experiences, both for you, Elise and Brendan. What's one strategy that surprised you by how well it worked? I'll give you a moment to think. I can see the eyes going up. Whoever wants to go first, jump in.
I think I've spoken about this before, and it did surprise me. It was also a very tough lesson personally to learn, but giving the space for the team to safely fail. I mean, oftentimes in business, right, we have huge milestones, we have outcomes to deliver, we have predetermined timelines, and I guess they don't always go hand in hand with behavioral change. And, you know, if you're driving for those outcomes and you're always like, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? And sometimes with behavioral change, you need to step back and give it some space to breathe. And you also need to allow for people to kind of go through those loops, right? Where they'll have an attempt at the behavior and they'll be okay, then they'll fall off. Then you kind of got to get them back into the loop again until, you know, it might take a couple of those loops before that behavior sticks. So I think noticing the business pressures with kind of the nature of behavioral change and giving people space was a huge learning for me.
I've got One thing I found really interesting was the humanization of the change. So there were a couple of people that at Origin Zero, we picked, I'm thinking of Ricky and Andrew specifically, and they brought a whole new way of doing things, and it humanized it more, made it more connective, and it gave it more vibrancy and energy. And I was surprised at how much so both of those people and other people you could select based on that energy and that vibe and things. So yeah, I think there's even in the Agile Manifesto, there might even be something around, find those people that have the energy and the passion, get them on board, and then you've got great advocates, you've got great people touting the thing that you're trying to push the company through. So yeah.
Nice. Right, let's move on. Let's move on to the next question. How can transformation leaders shift the culture from project mindset to sustainability mindset? I find that quite interesting, without overwhelming their teams or creating that resistance. What do you think, Brendan?
I think project mindset, I think you said it right at the beginning, has a defined start and end date. And I think for any organization going through the rapid change that we're going through, societal, organizational, everything at the moment, we're going to have to continually change. And I know change is hard, and I know for human beings, change is something that we would prefer didn't happen so often, but it's only going to get faster and more prevalent. So I think if you can couch the sort of change that your organization is going to need to go through, whether it be the capabilities it needs, whether the markets are changing, whether the competitors are doing things differently, whether the products need to change, all these sorts of things, it's going to be a constant. So I think if you can couch these terms in more of whether you call it sustainability or that things are just going to change. So how do we cope with that? How to become more resilient in that through those changes?
Yeah, and it is. We've got a comment here from Paul. What if the failure is not in the teams, but the exec making a poor decision or change of the execs within a transformation? It's part of the journey, I would say. I'm going to attempt at saying that. And we've actually lived through this, to be very honest.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where being really bought in from the rest of the leadership comes in, because if the leadership is, if the whole exec team changes, then that's gonna cause ripples, and it's probably gonna be a very different story. But if some of the exec team changes, we've had that happen, it really requires the buy-in from the rest to tell the same story, to say this is the journey we're on, and not just allow this jerking off. Okay, now we're going in a different direction just because.
Can I add as well? I think people forget that executives are just human beings, just like you, just like me, and we expect them to be supermen and superwomen and have all the answers. And again, this rapidly changing world, they have to build a team around them. So I think we need to be aware of that, and we need to know that they might make a mistake as well, just like us, and that's okay as long as it's not squillions of dollars. But they are human beings, so treat them as such.
Anything to add from your perspective, Elise?
I think in trying to shift from project mindset to sustainability mindset, one thing that is probably important is the clarity of your vision for the organization, what your organization is going to offer, and your strategy to get there. I think that's been something really crisp and clear for all of our leadership team, and that really helped us kind of have that North Star. We were all quite aligned. We used a lot of similar language around that. And then we could have the conversations. All right, so if we're heading there, how do we get there? Right, okay, this is the journey that we're on. So then, yeah, it's very outcome based, it's very future based, it's very visionary, rather than the project, which can be a lot more discreet. And yeah, I guess then also enables the leadership team to have the ownership to make some decisions around how we get there.
Nice. Let's look at.
I've got an answer already for this one.
For the next upcoming one, I'll just repeat it for everyone. So what's one common pattern that you see in organizations that lose momentum post transformation? What's the first lever you recommend pulling to course correct?
Hands down, that stop and reflect. what are we doing here? Are we still doing the right stuff? Have we gotten to where we're going? Are we doing things because we said we would, as opposed to they're actually deriving value? So yeah, reflection points. Is what we're doing the right thing? Have we changed enough, or have we changed so much that we need to adjust what it is, whether that's the rhythm, the frameworks, whatever the thing is that we're doing? Stop, have a look at it, keep the good stuff, get rid of the bad stuff, and continue. Yeah.
To understand what is actually the cause of it losing momentum, and not just
absolutely
something. Yeah. Nice. Elise, you're smiling. Anything to add from your side?
No, I agree.
Oh, good. Now I'm going to jump to a question at the end that I find actually quite interesting. How have you managed to gain leadership support on the time and resources needed to successfully deliver change and transformation? Big one. Second point being leverage experience to set up for success early rather than react during.
I think probably the largest driver was the executive sponsorship, setting that direction and setting that expectation. So I think if it had been the transformation team going out to, the business and saying, okay, now this is what we're going to do and this is what it's going to take, it would have really been a battle. And I'm not for a second suggesting that it wasn't tough. We still had a lot of that. But we had such clear direction and expectations set from our executive general manager down, that really opened the door. We're kind of steered in that direction. The expectation was really clear.
Yeah, that reinforces the point I said earlier around, if we had that driving force, that whether it's the CEO, whether it's one of the GMs or whatever it is, that is critical to the success of all of the transformations that I've been involved in. Someone at a senior level being able to drive this sort of thing.
I mean, in terms of managing resources, I guess we had a couple of tools at our disposal. So I think I've spoken about, we run OKRs and a quarterly planning cycle. That is definitely our opportunity to bring the leadership together to talk about what are the big meaty pieces we're going to do, but also what are the resources that it would take to do that? How does that balance with BAU work? And what trade-offs we would be making. So that then set the frame for the quarter. We used fortnightly showcases for those leaders to show the progress on those objectives and key results. It also was an opportunity for them to ask for the help that they needed elsewhere in the business to get the resourcing and the prioritization that they needed. When necessary, the Ways of Working champions also acted as a what did we call it, Brendan? I've just mentally blanked, like impediments or blockers, right? So we would jump in, and when we were seeing common themes across a couple of teams, we would then go, okay, let's bring people together. How do we address this? What needs to stop or start? What can we augment? And then that kind of helped us keep the focus on the most important things, kept the work going, kept the people engaged.
Nice. That is, very, very true. I'm reading questions here. We've got a lot around the buy-in of the senior execs. So another nice, interesting question here. When a new senior exec comes on board and isn't within the program yet, what are the most impactful ways to get them engaged?
I think it all comes back to the strategy. What is it the organization is trying to achieve? There should be a strategy there. If there isn't, we're in trouble already. But if there's a strategy, how are you going to achieve it? And whatever the plan is that you've got for the transformation, that should be delivering to that strategy. So that exec needs to be taken through what the strategy is, what we're trying to achieve over the timeline, and what the plan is to then deliver to that strategy. So if they're not across that and they don't understand the why, that's probably a bigger conversation for that leadership team to get the person on board. They can quibble about the plan, about how we implement it, and ask questions, challenge. That's great. But the end goal is to implement the strategy. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just sort of add that, and it's something that we often do, is we would buddy them with some of our existing peers and to help the onboarding. So obviously that's a natural onboarding kind of activity, but it certainly also helps with communicating what are those unsaid behavioral expectations and cultural expectations, and hopefully, it will also impart some, positivity and enthusiasm around the journey that we're already on.
Great. We've got one question here in the chat, actually. It says from Dayon. On the one hand, we allow transformations to fail. On another hand, up to which extent we declare the transformation fails? Do we declare the transformation fails? Because most of the time, transformation makes some improvements, but it didn't meet all initial goals. So what's some advice from both of you on how to restart?
I think metrics are really interesting, and I can't say that I've got these nailed, to be honest, but having baseline metrics of where we're at and where we want to get to is good to understand. Are we shifting the dial? Is it we don't get enough work done? Okay, cool. How much work do we get done at the beginning versus how much work do we want to get done at the end? Well, I mean, that's an example, but what are the metrics, and are you tracking those, and are you keeping an eye on those so that you can see whether you are shifting the dial? And if you're not shifting the dial, again, reflecting and going, have we set the dial wrong? Are we doing it wrong? What is the actual problem, and what do we need to do to remediate that?
I would add to that a healthy dose of pragmatism. So, we can have lots of measures and metrics. We can have a lot of feedback, lines of communication. Not all of them will be useful or helpful. And so it's a little bit around experience and trusting your gut around the things that matter. Yeah.
Nice. I found this very, very interesting thought. And I'm going to draw on what you said before, Elise. We talked about the planning, the being clear on the OKRs, the metrics to go with it. And so just sticking to this rhythm is like, okay, if we haven't achieved it now, what do we do next? And set ourselves the goals, objectives, and the key measurements to actually understand where do we need to pivot, change, and go to actually get closer to where we need. So it's not even about restarting, it's about using what you've put in place, if you've done it well, a cadence, a structure, scaffolding, to actually realign your journey to be more on track to where you need to go. So I think this is a really, really key one, a point.
Yeah. I noticed that there's a comment or a question around constant change. And I think my answer to that is kind of what you're talking about, Marlene. Like a system that works, that everyone can rely on, that they know that's where they can go to have those kind of decisions made, or to have the right conversations to set those goals. And when that then becomes second nature and everyone knows how to use it and is using it well, that reduces the change fatigue, right? It reduces the amount of effort that any of the teams need to do. Once those things are quite well established, then, like, they're kind of cogs that are just constantly turning, and it creates capacity to tackle other things, right? So a lot of this transformation change usually is around adopting new ways of working that makes us more efficient and connected so that we can go after bigger goals. So, really bedding down and having really reliable ways of doing things that are repeatable goes a long way to achieving that.
Yeah.
Can I build on that as well? I think once you've got something that's relatively consistent, but you've built into it those points where you can reflect, you can make lots of little tweaks as opposed to wholesale change on a regular basis, and that minimizes the change fatigue that Elise is talking about. I mean, we don't have to boil the earth every 6 months, but maybe you have a look at the way the teams are operating and you make a little tweak, and you try that for another 6 months, and you make another little tweak. Just little tweaks here and there can add up to a lot over 12, 6, 24 months. Yeah.
And I'm going to be sneaky here. I'm going to enter a question that I haven't put in. And speaking to the impact it has on people, the change, the transformation, what's the role of psychological safety and team engagement in all of this? Because I do think that is related to how much or how people deal with change. What are your thoughts on this?
So many thoughts where to start.
Sorry, I understood. I thought it was a very interesting one.
Yeah. I think team engagement and creating a team culture where people feel connected, that they know each other, eases the path to introducing new ideas and new ways of working. So if people are quite disengaged, they're not interested, or they're very resistant and there's a culture of resistance, these kinds of changes are very, very difficult. We actually had over the course of our journey, we had an OKR set just for the transformation program itself, which was really about bringing a connectedness of our people. When you adopt a value stream model and you move away from a functional model, which is what we did, you kind of think you're trying to get rid of silos, but sometimes you're just creating new silos. So those teams then did a great job in value streams of kind of connecting, but then they were giving us feedback that they didn't feel connected with the other value streams. So there was a job to do there. So we introduced a program called Coffee Pals, which just randomly selected people, and they got together and had half an hour to get to know someone, and no predetermined script, no questions, nothing that they had to deliver as an outcome. Was just spend half an hour with each other, get to know each other as humans. And the feedback has been really positive, that they've learnt about a colleague, but they've also inadvertently, without us asking them to, learnt about what that colleague and their team did and how that then had a relationship to their work as well.
Yeah, that is nice. It's about the human element and not forgetting that, and setting you going on the journey with the intention of not forgetting that, and actually setting goals around this is really I think is a really good one. And we've talked about failing or being safe to fail, and the psychological safety piece in there is, if you tell someone you're safe to fail, but if something goes wrong, watch out. That's not psychological safety. So we need to understand how do people need to be led through times of uncertainty, what is directive and what is open and what is safe to fail. And on that point, I would say maybe consider how you help your leaders level up, and don't forget to give them the training that they need as well to live in a world of change and create these safe spaces to fail and these experiences of connectedness, because it's also, it might be new to them or something that doesn't come easily. All right, we're going to take one last question. Let's go. The radically sustained model promises scalability. Can you share a real life example where this embedded approach flexed effectively in response to shifting priorities or team dynamics? I'm going to give this to Brendan.
I think Elise touched on this just before with Origin Zero, but I'll use another example at the moment, where we had 4 tribes and we were supposed to be 4 people. Turns out that we didn't need 4 people, so we shifted down to 3 people, and it ended up being 6 tribes. So we shifted the 3 people across 6 tribes rather than the original 3 or 4. So, I mean, the reality is, though, that with that spread across multiple tribes, there is a need to kind of compartmentalize what we can actually achieve in each of those. So that means a sit down and a rehash of exactly what it is that we're there to do. So if it was one coach, one tribe, we could do certain things, we could get to a certain depth. But if it's one coach, 2 tribes, obviously that depth is going to be shallower. So just sitting down with the client and being very crystal clear actually about what we can and can't achieve based on that, I think was an interesting discussion up front, because they expected to just do more, but then they saw the reality of it all, and it's actually a really good conversation to have with the client now. So yeah.
Nice. Right, let's do a very last quick fire round at the end. Elise, what is one piece of advice that you'd give to transformation leaders who want their change to stick?
In a sentence, I'd say be adaptive and focus on value. And I think in order to do that, you should be testing and learning constantly, sharing what you're learning, right? So that you're demonstrating some things that are not going to work and you're going to make a different choice. yeah, be adaptive. I think as a mindset, that's so important. And then when you have that quite well embedded, then, you know, going through the peaks and the troughs becomes a little bit easier.
Nice. And you, Brendan, what's your piece of advice?
It's not the scaled agile frameworks, it's not the tools, it's not the Jira, it's not the cadences and those sorts of things. Those are important, yes, but it's to that whoever the question writer was, it's about the people. It's about how the change is going to impact the people, how the people will pick up the change and follow it through, communicating with the people about the why of the change, what the intended outcomes are, and listening to the people as the change is happening to understand how it's impacting them and whether it's actually having the intended outcome or whether it's causing problems. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you, Brendan. I've just been made aware that we have another question that I've left out in the Q&A, so apologies for that. We'll get back to you. Actually 2 more questions, but I think this one, the one about humans and change, we have Elise sort of answered, so I'm going to consider this answered.
Oh, the other one's just Ricky. That's all right.
But yeah, so Ricky is asking, globally, which organizations do you think has done the best organizational transformation? And who would we benchmark ourselves against if we could choose someone?
Tough question.
That is a tough question.
I think that's an unanswerable question.
Do you know what sprang to mind immediately when I saw Ricky's question was Mercury's done a pretty good job, and it's in the energy industry as well. So if you were to look at someone and maybe have a look at some of the things that they might have done, maybe Mercury Energy here in New Zealand. Don't know. That just popped into my head immediately. They've won some awards for some of the change they've gone through and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
At least if you have any thoughts.
No. I mean, I don't have that much global experience on transformation. I've, you know, as you know, I've been at Origin for 12 years, so my field of vision's a little narrower.
That's all good. I would also probably concur. It is an unanswerable question. There is a lot of research out there. I think something I can recommend is to look at corporate rebels. They're going out and, you know, looking at not only transformations, but at different models of organizing organizations, and they might have some clues what works well. From what I have seen throughout my career, it's actually not necessarily what is the best, but the ones that have worked the best is the ones that have actually chosen to have the support from the top, which we've already discussed in length, but also that have picked a real thing to transform, like the real new strategy or a merger and acquisition, the program that actually brings organizations together, which is to what you were speaking, Brendan. And it is about not making the transformation something on the side over there and maybe testing it out at something that is unimportant. If you really want to transform, go for the important stuff, because this is what will make it change and will make it the most successful, because it is actually taking the things that mean something to people, to their careers, to their jobs, and not something that is done on the side of the desk. That's what I would add. So we are at the end, or almost at the end, actually, I should say, of our Q&A. Now the session has been recorded. If you want to follow up, we will send out the recording and the slides so that you can rewatch it if you're interested. And we'll be very soon sending out the invitation to our next webinar, so watch this space. If you are interested in Radically Sustain or any of our services, please reach out to us. We're really lovely people. We love a coffee if you want to grab one with us. And we are really there to help organizations level up and do better. That is our mission. And in this spirit, to say, we do want your feedback. It is important to us that we actually deliver value to you. Please let us know, was this helpful for you? What you thought of our conversation today? And please go to this form and help us out there. I want to thank Elise and Brendan very, very much for giving up their time, answering those sometimes gnarly questions and my curveballs. I had a pleasure, or I had a blast talking to you. It was a pleasure. And I hope to see you on another panel soon. thank you very much, whoever watched, and have a lovely weekend. Goodbye.
Thanks all.
Thank you.